I didn't come to my brother's wedding looking for answers, but fate handed me a truth more bitter than anything I'd ever feared. Lydia stepped into the coastal resort, where twinkling lights and laughter echoed, hoping to play the part of the supportive sister on Noah's big day. She wore a simple blue dress, a faint smile, ready to overlook the old cracks in their family ties. But when the staff handed her a name tag reading Lydia Harper, Table P, Auxiliary Section, her heart froze. The auxiliary table, near the service area, far from the glow of her parents and Noah. She told herself it was a mistake, tried to keep her composure, but Noah's distant glance and her mother's indifferent look planted a sharp question in her mind: did she truly belong here? Something was waiting, ready to erupt, and Lydia had no idea that tonight would change everything. Just minutes ago, she had walked into the resort with a forced smile, hoping Noah's wedding would be a chance to mend the invisible cracks in their family. But now, as the crystal chandeliers from the banquet hall cast their glow through the glass doors, illuminating her solitary silhouette, Lydia realized she was no more than an uninvited guest, adrift in the dazzling scene of fresh flowers and soft violin melodies. She took a deep breath, trying to push down the lump rising in her chest. It's just a small mistake, she told herself, a logistical oversight. But deep in her heart, another voice whispered that this wasn't the first time her family had pushed her to the sidelines. Lydia smoothed her blue dress, brushing away imaginary wrinkles, and walked toward the main hall, where laughter and clinking glasses wove a symphony of joy, a joy she wasn't sure she was allowed to share. She wanted to talk to someone, anyone, to confirm this was just a misunderstanding, that she still belonged in this family's picture. First, she sought out her mother, Helen. Helen stood near the head table, her silver hair elegantly pinned up, her shimmering silk dress catching the light. She was beaming, gently adjusting Noah's tie as if he were still the 10-year-old boy who needed her meticulous care. Lydia approached, her heart pounding, but she kept her voice soft. "Mom, can I talk to you for a moment?" Helen turned, her smile fading slightly when she saw Lydia. "Now, Lydia? I'm terribly busy, you can see that." She gestured toward Noah, surrounded by friends and Chloe's relatives. "Today's Noah's day, you know that." Lydia bit her lip, trying to stifle the sting of rejection. "I know, Mom. Just a minute." I was seated at the auxiliary table, near the service area. "I think there might be a mix-up." Helen frowned, not with concern but with a fleeting irritation, as if Lydia had brought up an unnecessary inconvenience. "The auxiliary table? What's the problem? You've always been fine on your own, Lydia. You don't need to sit at the head table to prove anything." She turned away, resuming her conversation with a distant aunt, leaving Lydia standing there, words caught in her throat. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. Her mother's words weren't new. "You've always been fine on your own," a refrain Lydia had heard since childhood, whenever she craved a hug or a word of encouragement. It was Helen's shield, an excuse for her neglect, as if Lydia's independence justified her lack of care. But today, in the opulent setting of Noah's wedding, those words cut like a knife, deeper than ever. Lydia turned away, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, the sound swallowed by the music and laughter. She sought out her father, Jonathan, clinging to a faint hope that he might understand. Jonathan stood at the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, his gaze drifting over the crowd. He was always like this, quiet, dodging any deep emotion, as if ignoring problems would make them disappear. "Dad," Lydia called softly, stepping closer. "I need to talk." Jonathan looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by his usual detachment. "What's this about, Lydia? Don't tell me you're fighting with your mother again." She shook her head, striving to keep her voice steady. "No, it's not that. I was seated at the auxiliary table, Dad. Not with the family, not with Noah's friends. I want to know why." Jonathan sighed, setting his glass on the bar, but his eyes avoided hers. "Lydia, today is Noah's day. Don't make a fuss over a seat. You know how hard your mother worked to organize everything." His words were gentle, but each one felt like a stone hurled at her heart. Don't make a fuss. How many times had she heard that? Every time she tried to voice her sense of abandonment, those moments when she stood silently on the fringes of family milestones, it was always the response, a way to silence her, to keep the peace for everyone else. But this time, it didn't just hurt, it made her angry. Not a loud, explosive anger, but a smoldering fire deep in her chest, urging her to understand why her family so easily cast her aside. She turned to Noah, her last hope. Noah stood nearby, a radiant smile on his face, his arm around Chloe in her sparkling white wedding dress. Lydia remembered their childhood, when Noah would run to her after being scolded by their mother, whispering that his big sister was his hero. But now, as she approached, Noah's eyes flashed with irritation, as if her presence disrupted his perfect moment. "Noah," she called, her voice soft but firm. "Can we talk for a second?" Noah glanced at Chloe, then reluctantly stepped to a quieter corner. "What's up, Lydia?" "I'm kind of busy." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Did you know where I was seated?" "The auxiliary table, near the service area." "I just want to know, was it on purpose?" Noah frowned, then let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Seriously, Lydia? It's just a seat. You always make things a bigger deal than they need to be. It's my wedding day, can't you just be happy for me?" Noah's words were the final blow, shattering the last fragments of hope in Lydia's heart. She looked into her brother's eyes, searching for a trace of the boy who once needed her, who loved her, but found only a stranger caught up in his own spotlight. Chloe, standing nearby, glanced at them with a thin smile, as if she knew something Lydia didn't. And then, like a premonition, Lydia felt a cold breeze, not from the ocean outside, but from the truth waiting to reveal itself. She stood on the resort's balcony, her hands gripping the icy railing, the moonlight silvering the sea below, but it couldn't calm the storm raging in her chest. The music from the banquet hall still echoed, the sweet violin melodies now only a reminder that she didn't belong in that radiant scene. After her mother's cutting words, her father's avoidance, and Noah's distant gaze, Lydia felt like a leaf torn from its branch by the wind, drifting in a world with no place for her. But as she closed her eyes, trying to stem the flood of emotions, an old memory surged back, sharp and painful, like a blade from the past slicing through the night. It didn't just explain why her heart broke so easily under her family's treatment, it was the first clue to the bitter truth she'd sensed when she stepped into this wedding. The memory pulled Lydia back to a winter afternoon when she was 22, freshly graduated from college, returning to the old suburban house to visit her family. It was one of the rare times she came home, as her internship in the city consumed nearly all her time and energy. The house was the same, pine-scented from the fireplace, pale sunlight filtering through curtains, and her mother's soft humming in the kitchen. But something felt off, an eerie quiet, as if the house held a secret she wasn't yet allowed to know. Noah, then 18, was away at college, so there were no bursts of his laughter or endless stories to fill the space. Lydia felt a flicker of relief, thinking this might be a chance to grow closer to her mother, to reclaim some of the family warmth she'd lost long ago. Helen, as usual, was bustling in the kitchen, preparing a batch of cookies she knew Noah loved. Lydia offered to help, but her mother only smiled faintly and told her to find an old book in the living room that she wanted to give to a friend. "It's somewhere on the shelf," Helen said, her voice gentle but distracted. Lydia nodded, climbing the stairs, feeling like a child sent on an errand to stay out of the way. The living room was unchanged, a dusty oak bookshelf, a worn armchair, and a pendulum clock ticking steadily. But as she pulled a book from the shelf, a small, battered tin box, dented and old, clattered to the floor, its metallic jangle like a whisper from the past. Curious, Lydia picked it up. It wasn't locked, just tied with a thin piece of twine. She hesitated, knowing she shouldn't pry into things that weren't hers, but something urged her on, a gut feeling that this box held what she'd always sought, a sign that she'd once been loved. When she lifted the lid, there were no jewels or money, only a stack of carefully folded papers, some yellowed with age. They were notes, written in Helen's flowing script, each line capturing a story, a moment, a memory, all centered on Noah. Lydia sank to the floor, her heart pounding as she turned the pages. Today Noah kicked a soccer ball for the first time, running so fast I couldn't keep up. Noah drew a picture at school, and his teacher said he had talent. Noah's 10th birthday, he wanted a blue bike, and his smile when he got it was worth everything. Page after page, the words chronicled Noah's life with fierce love and pride, as if he were the center of Helen's universe. Lydia searched, almost desperately, for a single mention of herself, a moment, a memory, however small. She flipped faster, her fingers trembling, but there was nothing. Not once did her name appear, no story of the day she won the school writing contest, no line about the night she cried herself to sleep after being bullied, no trace of Lydia Harper. Her breath grew shallow, as if the room's air were being sucked away. The tin box lay silently on the floor, no longer just an object. It was a declaration, a truth Helen had chosen to set in ink and paper. Noah was the child she cherished, while Lydia was a faint shadow, unworthy of being remembered. Lydia thought back to all the times she'd tried to please her mother, excelling in school, being obedient, never asking for much, but now she saw those efforts were futile. Helen hadn't forgotten her, she'd simply deemed her unimportant. She heard Helen's footsteps on the stairs and quickly tucked the box back in place, but her eyes had changed. When Helen entered, smiling to ask, "Did you find the book?" Lydia only nodded, her voice so soft it was barely audible. She said nothing about the box, didn't ask why her mother had never written about her, because she feared the answer would hurt more than the silence. But from that moment, an invisible crack formed in her heart, one she tried to hide with smiles and independence, yet it always ached quietly. Back on the resort's balcony, Lydia opened her eyes, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The moonlight bathed her face, revealing a silent tear rolling down her cheek. That tin box wasn't just a relic, it was the key to every distance she'd felt in her family. It explained why her mother saved her warmest hugs for Noah, why her father spoke of Noah's achievements with unguarded pride, why Noah could effortlessly command everyone's attention without trying. And now, at this wedding, that memory was a mirror reflecting the truth. Lydia wasn't just pushed to the sidelines today, she'd been there all along, for years. She left the balcony, the moonlight leaving a silver streak on her shoulders, as if whispering that she could no longer hide in her own shadows. The memory of the tin box, filled with notes solely for Noah, still lingered, but it was no longer a blade piercing her heart. Instead, it was a small, steady flame, smoldering yet resolute, pushing her back toward the banquet hall, not to blend in, but to confront. Lydia no longer craved a hug or an apology from her family, what she wanted now was the truth, no matter how sharp. As she pushed open the heavy glass door, the violins and laughter rushed over her, but they no longer made her feel out of place. They were like a smokescreen, hiding the secrets she'd sensed since stepping into the resort. The bitter truth she'd glimpsed under the floral arch, fate handed me a truth more bitter than anything I'd ever feared, was drawing closer, and Lydia knew tonight it wouldn't let her escape. The banquet hall sparkled with crystal chandeliers, white flowers arched into domes, and wine glasses shimmering red like blood in the light. Lydia wove through the crowd, ignoring the curious glances from a few guests as she passed. She no longer sought her mother or father, she wanted Noah, to look into her brother's eyes and ask if he truly saw her as part of this momentous day. But before she could reach Noah, surrounded by Chloe's friends and family, an unexpected moment pulled her in another direction. She paused near the prep area, where catering staff hustled with trays of food. A familiar voice, sharp but deliberately hushed, drifted from behind a red velvet curtain, Chloe's, the radiant bride in her dazzling white gown. Lydia meant to walk away, not wanting to eavesdrop, but her name in Chloe's sentence stopped her cold. She stood frozen, heart pounding, as if her body knew what she was about to hear would change everything. "I told Helen to seat Lydia at the auxiliary table," Chloe said, her tone light but laced with smugness. "She's always acting so noble, like the perfect big sister, but I didn't want her ruining our wedding." Noah agreed right away, he said Lydia would never make a fuss. A soft laugh came from the other person, likely Chloe's best friend, who replied, "Smart move. Noah's the star of their family anyway. Who cares about Lydia?" Lydia felt her blood turn to ice. Not because of Chloe's words, she was used to coldness from outsiders, but because Noah, her brother, who once held her hand through stormy days, had agreed to push her aside. She stood there, hidden by the curtain, her hand unconsciously clutching the hem of her dress, as if needing an anchor to keep from collapsing. The image of Noah's radiant smile in the banquet hall, his eyes skimming past her without care, now burned clearer than ever. But instead of letting the pain drown her, Lydia felt a new anger, not explosive, but cold and honed, like a blade sharpened by years of endurance. She wouldn't let this slide like before. She stepped out from the shadows, resolved to confront Noah. The banquet hall still dazzled, but to Lydia, it now felt like a stage where every glance and word carried hidden meaning. She spotted Noah near the head table, toasting with friends, his smile as bright as a spotlight. Lydia approached, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "Noah, can I talk to you for a moment?" Noah turned, his smile fading briefly, as if sensing something amiss. "What's up, Lydia?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "We're having a good time. What do you want?" She looked straight into his eyes, searching for the boy who once needed her, but saw only a stranger caught in his own glow. "Do you really think I don't matter today?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "Chloe said you agreed to seat me at the auxiliary table so I wouldn't ruin things. Is that true?" Noah blinked, then let out a forced laugh, as if trying to brush off the tension. "God, Lydia, where'd you hear that nonsense?" "Chloe was just joking. You're always so sensitive." He reached to pat her shoulder, but Lydia stepped back, her gaze locked on him. "Don't lie, Noah," she said, her voice now carrying a new resolve. "I heard every word. You agreed with Chloe, didn't you? You think I don't deserve a place in this family?" The air around them thickened. A few nearby guests stopped talking, turning to watch, but Lydia didn't care. Noah's brow furrowed, his ease vanishing, replaced by clear irritation. "Lydia, that's enough," he said, his voice lower, as if trying to control the situation. "It's my wedding day. Can't you let one day go by without drama? What do you want, to make a scene?" His words hit like a blow, but Lydia didn't flinch. She felt a new strength, not from anger, but from clarity. She wasn't seeking Noah's approval anymore, she just wanted him to admit the truth. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," she replied, her voice steady but cutting. "I just want to know why my brother, who I thought was family, chose to push me away." Noah opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Chloe appeared, her wedding gown glinting like a claim to power. She smiled, but her eyes were ice-cold. "Lydia, what's going on?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're having a happy day. You don't need to stir things up." Lydia turned to Chloe, and for the first time, she felt no need to be polite. "I heard you talking to your friend, Chloe," she said, her voice calm but heavy with intent. "You told my mother to seat me at the auxiliary table because you didn't want me ruining things." And Noah agreed. "I want to hear you say it was a misunderstanding." Chloe blinked, her smile stiffening. She glanced at Noah, as if expecting him to salvage the moment, but Noah stood silent, his hand tightening around his glass. The air between them was taut, like a string about to snap. A few guests began to whisper, their eyes fixed on the trio. Chloe gave a brittle laugh, the sound like breaking glass. "Lydia, you're blowing this out of proportion," she said, her voice still sweet but edged with frost. "No one meant to hurt you. You're just not the focus today, that's all." Chloe's words were a cold gust, but instead of making Lydia tremble, they made her stand taller. She looked at Noah, waiting for him to speak, for a denial, a sign he was still her brother. But Noah only looked down, his eyes avoiding hers, and his silence was louder than any words. Lydia felt her heart plummet, but not from pain, it was release. She realized Noah wasn't just indifferent, he'd chosen to stand with Chloe, with the spotlight, and left her in the dark. Lydia stepped out of the banquet hall, leaving behind the stifling air of crystal chandeliers and forced laughter like a curtain drawn shut. The confrontation with Noah and Chloe still echoed in her mind, not because of their words, but because of Noah's silence, a silence that confirmed she'd never truly been part of his world. Yet instead of drowning her, that moment ignited a new spark, not hope for reconciliation, but a resolve to uncover the truth. She'd felt it since entering the resort, when her own reflection in the floral arch whispered, "Fate handed me a truth more bitter than anything I'd ever feared." Now, standing in the marble-lined corridor with the salty sea breeze brushing past, Lydia knew that truth was no longer distant. It was coming, like a towering wave, ready to sweep away everything her family had built on a foundation of lies. She didn't plan to wander far, only wanting a moment's quiet to sort her emotions, but fate had its own way of guiding her. As she passed the small garden, where jasmine blossoms perfumed the air under glowing lanterns, a low, warm voice called her name. "Lydia?" She turned to see Ethan, an old friend of Noah's, standing under a palm tree, the ember of a cigarette glowing red in his hand. Ethan had been close to Noah in college, but she'd rarely seen him in recent years. His angular face and sharp eyes carried a hint of weariness, as if he, too, was escaping something tonight. "Ethan," Lydia replied softly, managing a polite smile. "It's been a while." He nodded, but his gaze stayed on her, as if weighing something. "I saw you in the banquet hall earlier," he said slowly. "You don't seem like someone who stirs up trouble, but it looked like something's wrong. Am I right?" Lydia was caught off guard. She wasn't used to being noticed, especially on a night when she felt invisible. But she didn't want to delve into her pain, not with someone nearly a stranger. "Just a long day," she answered lightly, hoping to end the conversation. But Ethan didn't let it go. He stubbed out his cigarette in a nearby ashtray and stepped closer, his voice dropping, as if wary of being overheard. "Lydia, I don't want to meddle in your family's business, but there are things about Noah I think you should know." He paused, his eyes scanning the garden to ensure they were alone. "Do you have a moment to talk? Somewhere more private?" A chill ran down Lydia's spine. Ethan's words weren't mere curiosity, they carried a weight, as if he held a secret that could unravel everything. She nodded, her heart racing, and led him to a secluded spot near a pond, where dim lights and the soft lapping of waves drowned out the noise from the banquet hall. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked, her voice now edged with a new resolve, as if she were ready to face anything. Ethan sighed, pulling his phone from his pocket, his fingers swiping quickly across the screen. "I don't want to hurt you, Lydia, but Noah isn't who you think he is." He handed her the phone, its screen displaying a long thread of texts between him and Noah. Lydia took it, her hand trembling slightly, though she wasn't sure what she was bracing for. But as her eyes scanned the words, the world around her seemed to stop. The first message was from Noah, months ago. "Thanks for the loan, Ethan. This wedding has to be huge, Chloe wants it that way. Don't worry, I'll pay you back soon." Lydia frowned, she hadn't known Noah borrowed money, but it wasn't shocking. But as she scrolled down, another message froze her. Noah wrote, "About that contract, I signed it with Lydia's name. She'll never notice, she's clueless. If there's trouble, just pin it on her. No one would believe her anyway." Another, weeks later, "Lydia's the perfect scapegoat, Ethan. She'll never suspect, and the family only cares about me. Easy as pie." Lydia's breath caught, as if someone had drained the air from her lungs. Noah hadn't just borrowed money for a lavish wedding, he'd forged her signature on a contract. Ethan later explained it involved siphoning funds from Chloe's family trust, an act that could land Lydia in legal trouble if exposed. But what hurt most wasn't the deceit, it was how Noah spoke of her, clueless, scapegoat. No one would believe her. Those words weren't just betrayal, they were a declaration that she was worthless, unworthy of his respect, even as his sister. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes blurring with tears but her voice steady. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Ethan shrugged, but his gaze was sincere. "Because I saw you in the banquet hall, Lydia. I saw how you stood up for yourself, even when no one took your side. And I know Noah won't stop unless someone exposes him." He paused, then added, "And because I think you deserve the truth." Before Lydia could respond, another voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. "If you need more proof, I can help." Lydia turned to see Margaret, Chloe's mother, standing at the garden's entrance, her deep green silk dress glinting under the lanterns. Margaret, with her silver hair pinned high and eyes sharp as a blade, wasn't easily fooled. She approached, holding an iPad, her voice calm but heavy with the weight of someone about to upend the board. "I overheard Ethan talking to a friend about Noah's loan," she said. "And I looked into it. It's not just a forged contract in your name, Lydia. Noah tried to hide his debt by transferring it to you. I have all the emails and documents here." Lydia stood still, feeling the ground beneath her crumble. Margaret touched her shoulder lightly, a rare but meaningful gesture. "You don't deserve to be treated like this," she said, her voice softer. "And I won't let my daughter marry someone like Noah without knowing the truth." The air around them seemed to freeze, broken only by the steady rhythm of waves, like the heartbeat of a world awaiting an explosion. Margaret turned to Ethan. "I need you to come with me to the banquet hall," she said firmly. "We're ending this now." She looked at Lydia, her eyes carrying an unspoken invitation. Lydia took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at a crossroads, turn away and remain invisible, or step into the storm to claim her truth. Lydia followed Margaret and Ethan back into the banquet hall, each step echoing like a drumbeat in her chest. The crystal chandeliers overhead glittered like captive stars, but the room's atmosphere was heavy, as if the walls themselves held their breath for an impending explosion. The secret Ethan and Margaret carried, the bitter truth Lydia had sensed since passing through the floral arch, was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It had become a torch, ready to burn down the perfect picture Noah and her family had so carefully crafted. Lydia felt no trembling or fear, she felt a razor-sharp clarity, as if for the first time in her life, she saw everything as it truly was. The banquet hall, with its pristine white flowers and dreamy violins, was no longer a stage for joy, it was an arena, and Lydia, though unwillingly, had become the bearer of truth. Margaret stopped in the center of the hall, her regal presence like a queen about to deliver judgment. She raised a hand, and the band, sensing the shift, quietly ceased playing. The final violin note lingered, then faded, leaving a stifling silence. All eyes turned to her, from guests in glittering attire to catering staff huddled by the walls. Noah, standing near the head table with Chloe, turned, his smile freezing as he saw Margaret, Ethan, and Lydia. Chloe, her wedding gown sparkling like a claim to power, gripped Noah's hand tighter, but her eyes flickered with panic, as if she sensed something was about to crumble. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, her voice ringing out, clear and sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. "I apologize for interrupting this joyous moment, but a truth must be revealed, here and now." She fixed her gaze on Noah, unwavering. "Noah Harper, whom we all thought was the perfect groom, has built this day on a foundation of deceit." A murmur rippled through the hall, like small waves breaking on a shore. Noah stepped forward, his voice shaky but clinging to confidence. "Mrs. Margaret, this is my wedding day. What are you doing? If there's an issue, we can discuss it privately." Margaret smiled, but it was a cold, unyielding smile. "Privately? No, Noah. Truth doesn't deserve to be hidden in the dark." She turned to the crowd, her voice now carrying an irresistible weight. "Noah didn't just borrow money to fund this wedding, something he hid from his family and mine, he also deliberately shifted the blame to someone else to protect himself. And that person," she paused, her eyes shifting to Lydia, "is his sister, Lydia Harper." Lydia felt every gaze turn to her, but this time, she didn't bow her head or shrink back. She stood tall, shoulders steady, her eyes locked on Noah. He paled, his mouth opening to speak, but Margaret gave him no chance. She raised her iPad, its screen glowing like a verdict. "I have proof," she said, her voice even but commanding. Forged contracts, emails, and Noah's own words about how he exploited Lydia's trust. He called her a scapegoat, believing she'd never notice, that their family would always side with him. The hall erupted in whispers, some guests covering their mouths, others shaking their heads. Chloe released Noah's hand, stepping back, her eyes shifting from shock to fury. "Noah," she said, her voice trembling, "tell me this isn't true." Noah shook his head, his voice rising, nearly frantic. "Chloe, you have to believe me. This is a misunderstanding." He turned to Lydia, his eyes pleading but tinged with desperation. "Say something, Lydia. You know I'd never mean to hurt you." But Lydia said nothing. She looked at Noah, and for the first time, she saw him not as her brother, but as a stranger who'd chosen false glory over family. She didn't need to speak, as Margaret said, the truth needed no darkness. And then, as if fate wanted to complete the picture, Helen stepped forward from the crowd, her face ashen, her trembling hands clutching her purse like a shield. Jonathan followed, his eyes heavy, no longer avoiding hers. "Lydia," Helen called, her voice breaking, as if trying to hold together the shards of a dream. "Did you know about this? Why didn't you tell me?" Lydia looked at her mother, and for a moment, she saw Helen in the kitchen, smiling as she spoke of Noah, never sparing Lydia such a glance. She took a deep breath, her voice calm but infused with newfound strength. "Mom, I didn't know, because no one in this family ever thought I was worth trusting. But now I know, and I don't need you to ask why. The truth speaks for itself." Helen collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face, silent tears falling. Jonathan stepped forward, and for the first time in years, he met Lydia's eyes. "Lydia," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry. I was wrong to let things go this far. I was wrong not to see you." His apology hung in the air, but for Lydia, it came too late. She nodded, not out of forgiveness, but because she no longer needed it. She had crossed the pain of yearning for love, and now she stood here, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Noah, left alone in the center of the hall, shouted, his voice pure desperation. "You're all ruining me. Chloe, you can't turn your back on me. Mom, Dad, say something." But Chloe had already walked away, her figure disappearing through a door, leaving Noah alone under judgmental gazes. Helen didn't look up, and Jonathan only shook his head, his eyes now filled with disappointment. The banquet hall, once a place of toasts and celebration, now resembled a ruined arena, with Noah as the sole defeated. The white flowers wilted under the lights, and the guests' murmurs rose like a chorus of truth. Lydia stood there, feeling neither triumph nor anger, only a gentle emptiness, not from losing her family, but from realizing she'd never truly had them. Noah, whose smile once filled their family with pride, was now a fading shadow, consumed by his own deceit. Margaret placed a hand on Lydia's shoulder, a brief but meaningful gesture. "You're stronger than you know, Lydia," she said, her voice low but warm. "Remember that." Lydia nodded, her gaze sweeping the hall one last time, not to seek approval, but to say goodbye to what she'd once craved. She walked out of the hall without looking back. The sea breeze swept over her, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. The bitter truth she'd sensed from the night's start had been laid bare, not only shattering Noah but freeing her from the chains of a family that was never truly hers. The banquet hall behind her still glowed, but for Lydia, the real light now lay ahead, where she would write her own story. This morning, in a small room overlooking the sea, Lydia opened her suitcase and pulled out a wooden box where she'd once kept family keepsakes, a photo of her standing alone by a Christmas tree, a letter from a young Noah promising to always love his sister. She didn't open the box, didn't need to look back. Instead, she placed it on the bookshelf, like closing a book she'd finished reading, not to forget, but to move forward. She smiled, not out of triumph, but because she no longer needed to fight to be seen. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with Helen's name. "Lydia, I want to see you. I know I was wrong." Weeks ago, that message might have sent her scrambling to respond, hoping a HUD could erase years of invisibility. But now, she only read it, then set the phone down, her gaze drifting to the sea. She wasn't angry at her mother or resentful of her father, she simply no longer needed them to feel whole. Lydia had learned that family isn't just where you come from, it's where you're valued, and sometimes, the truest family is yourself, scars and light included. She stepped onto the balcony, holding a plane ticket, not to escape, but to explore. Santorini was just the first stop, ahead lay untraveled roads and untold stories. She thought of yesterday's sunset, the sky blazing red like a promise that life still held countless colors for her. Lydia didn't need apologies or validation from those who'd turned away. She found them within herself, in the way she stood tall before the sea, in the way she smiled without needing anyone to see. Lydia's story teaches us that self-worth doesn't depend on others' recognition, even from family. Walking away from toxic relationships, though painful, is a courageous step toward reclaiming yourself. In life, learn to listen to your inner voice and prioritize your happiness over unreasonable expectations. When Lydia chose to walk her own path in Santorini, she reminded us that true freedom comes from accepting yourself, without needing anyone's approval. Cherish those who truly respect you, and don't be afraid to let go of what makes you feel invisible. Life is a journey to find your own light, and sometimes, you have to light that torch yourself.